starts. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Simon Jacobson, and I begin with a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year
to everyone. Even though it's not the Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish Rosh Hashanah yet, it's a pretty universal day. And being that it's the end of the fiscal year of 2000 and time is flying, already in 2008, end of 2008 on the threshold of 2009. So different analysts and pundits, everybody's weighing in about this past year, whether it was the darkest year in history or not. So from a Jewish perspective, we clearly know it wasn't the darkest year in history. Far from it. There were far darker years. But I was just listening on the way here at the radio, so they were asking one of the ways you want to find out what a year is like, at least in the world of entertainment. So you find out what the search engines, what were the top 5 searches in 2008. So what? I bet you will not guess what number 1 was.
Britney Spears.
Right.
What was it?
Britney Spears.
Oh.
Just in case you thought you had your priorities right. Britney Spears. And I think number 3 was Obama, and of course the economy was in there somewhere, and a few others. So clearly these search engines don't tell us much. They tell us more about, I guess, the frivolousness of people's interests, the fickle attention that most people have. But the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement of Shneur Zalman Liadi, sometimes known as the Baal Tanya, the Baal Shulchan Aruch, he's the author of the classic work called the Tanya, a great work, a masterpiece of Kabbalistic and Hasidic Bible, some call it. And he was also the author of a Shulchan Aruch, which is the code of Jewish law. So you're talking about a genuine and a colossal scholar who lived in the 18th century. And he once stated, he said, "Am darf leben mit der Zeit," in Yiddish. "Darf leben mit der Zeit." Translated in English, it means you have to live with the times. And he stated in that cryptic manner. And later, when his Chassidim, his followers, were trying to understand what did he mean by that, what means leben mit der Zeit, what does it mean to live with the times? So his son explained it for them. Living with the times means living with the Torah that is read in a particular time. That means leben mit der Zeit. As you may know, that the portions of the Torah, there are 52 chapters in the Torah, and corresponding to 52 weeks in the year. And each chapter breaks down into 7 sections. In effect, every day of the year has its corresponding section in the Torah. So living with the time means to live with the chapter, or with the section in the chapter that we're living with. So in this case, it's the 4th section in the Wednesday of the Parsha, the Vayigash, the end of the book of Genesis. But even this statement, for those that grew up with what Torah is, and grew up in going to synagogue, and hearing the Torah read every Shabbos, 3 times a week, every Monday, Thursday, and Shabbos. So maybe it's second nature to them, that the Torah is a part of your life. Whether they understand why it's part of their life is another story. You know, many people are programmed, mechanical Jews, but it's part of people's lives. But we live in a generation where most Jews did not grow up in such an environment. So in a certain way, every challenge also has a blessing in it. The fact is that Jews who did not grow up with it challenge us all. Those of us that grew up with it. And the big question, why is it so vital to live with the time? Why is it so important to live with the Parsha? What is it in the Parsha that makes it so important to live with? So when Alter Rebbe makes a simple statement, to live with the Zeit, to live with the times, when you analyze it, it really requires some explanation. when you look into Torah, most of this Torah, even though the Bible remains the biggest bestseller in history, beyond the New York Times best-selling best-selling books, and the Bible has been translated more than any other book, and it's the numbers of the travels, as I said, sell every year, literally in millions of copies throughout the world. Yet at the same time, when you open a Bible, you open a Torah, and you read it, so yes, there are the classic stories and classic lessons and messages, the stories of good and evil, the battles between good and evil, the Garden of Eden, the loss of innocence, the loss of paradise, the different different moral and ethical dilemmas and guidelines and inspiration that the Torah provides. But from a quantitative point of view, most of the Torah, if you read it, really seems very archaic and not relevant at all to our lives. So the Ten Commandments and many of the laws, yes, are very applicable, and you can even say are the basis of modern civilization. A modern democracy like the United States is basically built on the morality and ethics of the Bible, which are accepted by the major religions, which are the driving ethos of the major religions. But there are chapters upon chapters, when you read them, they don't seem to have any modern or contemporary relevance. You just take the book of Vayikra, the third book of the 5 books of Chumash, of the Torah. The book of Vayikra, Leviticus, is, I would say 95% of it is about events and about laws that are not even applicable today. Without a temple, you don't have the laws of purity and impurity, you don't have the laws of the offerings, you don't have the laws of all the priests, and all the way they served in the temple. A big part of the mitzvahs, as a matter of fact, some even count that there are, out of the 248 positive mitzvot, there are 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. 365 are negatives, like 365 days of the solar year that we're concluding now. So that's why New Year is even applicable from a Torah point of view. There is the concept of 365 days in the year. And there's the 248 positive mitzvahs, also called positive mitzvahs, thou shalt. So out of the 248, so there are those that the scholars that have counted that we have today only 86 that we can actually perform out of 248, because the rest are not applicable, at least in action, today. Like the offerings in the temple, as I said, laws of purity and impurity, and many, many other laws that are mostly in the book of Leviticus. So when it says living with the time, what does it mean to live with the time with chapters that don't have any immediate relevance to us? Now, even the stories of Genesis, which are mostly about, Sefer HaYashar, is the story of the people Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their lives. Even there, yes, there are some inspirational and relevant messages, but a lot of it also can seem out of time, out of touch, and out of time, out of place. The events that took place in the Bible, this week's chapter, for instance, in Egypt, when the brothers the tribes reconcile with Joseph, took place in another part of the world in Egypt, in another time in history. There was no Wall Street, there was no Madoff, there was no Mumbai, there was no Middle East as we know it altogether. There was Egypt as a superpower, Joseph was the second in command, he controlled most of the economy at the time, and he turned Egypt into a superpower. And you have the chapter talks about how the brothers, after selling him into slavery and not knowing where he was for 22 years, finally discover, to their surprise, that Joseph is alive, not just alive, but he's running the country. And the story continues of the reunion of Joseph and his brothers, and then with his father Jacob, and how the Jews at the time, all the people that were with Jacob, come down to Egypt to live because of the famine. They come live in Egypt, and they would be living there for the rest of their lives, until next chapter when they all die, and then their children would become enslaved by the next generation of Egyptians, and would begin the classic famous story of the Jews in Egypt, the Egyptian bondage, which would be followed by the Exodus, and the rest of the Torah story. So if you think about this story, okay, it surely has some relevant messages, but most of it is a piece of history that's so far back. How does one explain? It means living with the times. How do you live with this? How do you live with it as if it's happening right now? You know, we have what we call the New York Times, all the news that's fit to print, as they put it, and nowhere in the front page or in the editorial or op-ed page is there any mention of the Parsha. So how does Alter Rebbe say, like some secular skeptics would say, with such breitkeit, with such with such confidence that you have to live with the times. And he lived long before there was a New York Times. So clearly, a big part of this world does not live with these times, and they don't even see the importance of it. And as I said earlier, even those that grew up with the Torah, not necessarily that when they want to know what's going on in the world around them or in their own personal lives, will open up the Parsha. They'll open up a newspaper, or if it's personal issues, may go to a therapist, if they're not in denial. And how many people will actually open up the Torah to live with the times? So the statement that the Alter Rebbe made is a very powerful one, but what does it really mean? And to really answer this question requires a completely revisiting and relooking at the whole meaning of what Torah is. And briefly, the word Torah. Does anybody know what the word Torah means?
Right.
It's one meaning.
Right.
Torah comes from the word, like in Aramaic, Torah is Eiraisa. Eiraisa in Zohar says is Eir Yaisa, the drawing down of light. So Torah is connected to Torah, light. It has the word light in the Torah. But Torah, even more immediate, has another meaning, which means Hira. It means instruction, a directive. Now it's interesting, everyone uses the word Torah, many people don't know what it means. Most people will translate Torah as Bible, which just carries over the question, what does Bible mean? So it has some Latin meaning. I forgot what it was. You can Google it later. Google it. It's all right. Bible has some Latin meaning of, I think it means something like Old Testimony or something like that. But the word Torah in Hebrew, like it is with all words in Hebrew, Hebrew is, I don't know if you know this, but there are in languages, there are different types of languages. Most languages, especially Western Latin languages, Latin-based languages, are what we call descriptive languages. Words are used to describe things, objects, phenomena, interaction between objects and subjects. Then there are the few languages, and Hebrew is maybe the primary one, that are metaphorical languages. They're not just another language. Hebrew is a metaphorical language, which means every word has many, many layers of meanings. So a word is not just a descriptive word. It actually has a meaning, and that's why if you work in translation, you know this, that it takes, to translate one sentence in Hebrew, it requires at least 2 sentences. One line in Hebrew will require around 2 lines in English minimum, except in rare instances. And 5 lines in French, by the way. French is even more descriptive than, needs more words to explain things than English. Chinese, I think, though I don't know Chinese, but I hear that Chinese is also a metaphorical language. But Chinese, if you know the Chinese typewriter, has something like 2,800 keys. I know, it's like the size of this room. How they type, I don't really know. But the Chinese typewriter, because I think letters in Chinese are not like ABC, letters are words. So it's a combination of many words. You know, when you have 22 letters in the alphabet, or 24 letters in the alphabet, in Hebrew it's 22 letters. So the letters make up words. But anyway, going back to Hebrew, Hebrew is a metaphorical language. So you can use a word like the word Torah. No way to translate that in one word. You could say instruction, you could say light, but what does it mean if someone would say instruction? I read the instruction. You'd have to explain instruction of what? Whereas we use the word Torah. Torah requires at least a paragraph to explain what kind of light and what kind of instruction. And the answer is quite fascinating. The Medrash says like this: just like an architect has a blueprint, in Aramaic, pisrayis or pinkasayis, which means he has a blueprint by which he uses, or she uses, by which to build. You know, you create a blueprint. The reason it's called blue because the ink is usually blue in a blueprint. And it's a miniature version, a microcosm of the entire structure. Without the blueprint, there's no way you can build a healthy, sound structure. So the blueprint is your guide. The blueprint, in a sense, captures the vision and the implementation and all the mechanics of what has to be built, including electrical plans and plumbing plans and so on and so forth. So the blueprint then is the guide by which the builders implement the vision and the plan that the architect and the concept person came up with. So the Medrash says the same is with the Torah. The Torah is the blueprint of the grand cosmic architect called God. Then God too first created a blueprint, And and following that blueprint, he created the universe. Torah is in essence that blueprint. So if you want to understand the inner dynamics and the inner workings of existence, that's what the Torah is for. Now, I can guarantee you, tell anyone that that's the Torah, most people will not know that. Why? Because we're not taught this in yeshiva, even if you're a scholar. You may know it as some obscure medrash, but this is the essence of what the Torah is. So then someone will say, so what are all these stories? If that's the case, the Torah should have sounded like an engineering manual. It should have sounded like a how-to manual that you bring home with all the schematics and mechanics of existence. The Torah is written, stories about Adam and Eve in the garden, and then you have the stories of the Noah and the flood, and then Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and as I said, the tribes, their jealousy and the selling and the buying, the whole thing. It doesn't look like at all like a blueprint or a manual of that sort. So the Talmud answers this question by saying, Torah dibra b'lashon b'nei adam. The Torah speaks in the language of human beings. In other words, the Torah is metaphor. So though all these incidents and episodes actually occurred in the time that they occurred and in the place that they occurred, but the essence of the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not a story about history. The Torah is not a history book. The Zohar actually has very harsh words for someone who calls the Torah a history book or a book of stories or even inspiration. Because it's the meaning, in a sense. Imagine you worked your whole life on a blueprint of existence and then someone calls it a storybook or a history book. That's like belittling the whole power of the Torah. The Torah is a blueprint. It's a spiritual blueprint of existence, of every part of existence, every detail, including our own beings. So just as a doctor or a scientist will give you an X-ray of your body or an X-ray of the inner workings of the universe, a CAT scan of God's mind is the Torah equivalent. That's the power of it. And the reason it speaks in this language, which is maybe one of the beautiful things of the Torah, it specifically doesn't speak in technical language. It speaks in language of human language, b'lashon b'nei adam, story through human narrative. Abraham, the Zohar and the Kabbalists explain, is a archetype of chesed, of love. So though there was a man called Abraham, and ein mikra yetzim b'dei pshutei, which means that we cannot take the Torah away from its literal interpretation, but by no means that's just the surface level. The real story of Abraham is the story of love. Now, is love something that is isolated to a particular part of geography or a particular time in history? Absolutely not. There was love then, and there's love today. You want to understand the blueprint of love, you have to study the story of Abraham. And if you want to understand the blueprint, an X-ray of discipline, the antithesis to chesed, gvura, so you study the world of Pachad Yitzchak, of Isaac, who embodies gvura. And if you want to understand the world of compassion, tiferes, and rachamim, empathy, you study the life of Jacob. And each character in the Torah, and each episode in the Torah, is in essence like a shell, like a body, that is descriptive of a particular archetype, of a personality that is timeless. So though it manifested in a particular time in history, in a particular place in the world, but its timelessness is a blueprint as it was then, as it is, that's how it is today. Which explains another strange statement. The Torah says, the Talmud says, that the Avos, the patriarchs, Kaimu Kol HaTorah Kula, they fulfilled the entire Torah even before it was given. That's what the Talmud says. What does that mean? How did Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob exactly fulfill the mitzvah, let's say, of Passover? The whole Passover comes to commemorate the Egyptian Exodus. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived before the Exodus. How could they have been, they have a Seder? They ate matzah? Morah? What did they do? And what about tefillin? Tefillin, the mitzvah of tefillin for a male to put on tefillin every morning, is a mitzvah that also grew out of Egypt. The chapters that we put, why do we put on tefillin? It says in the next book, in Exodus, in Pasha Boy, God says, because I took you out of Egypt. One way to remember that is through putting on tefillin. And the same was with tzitzis and many other. Basically, there really are actually no mitzvahs. There are no actual commandments except one, circumcision, that precedes the giving of the Torah. So you could say Shabbos, they did something commemorative. Even Shabbos, it says in parts of the Torah, that's to remember also the exodus from Egypt. But Shabbos also has another aspect that reminds us of the creation. But how could the Talmud just make this statement that the patriarchs fulfilled the entire Torah? Which of course makes sense. If we fulfill the Torah, did our own forefathers and matriarchs and patriarchs not fulfill it? The answer is they fulfilled the blueprint of it before it took on physical shape and form. They understood its archetype and it didn't yet manifest, because the concept of leaving Egypt there's a physical aspect to it, which is leaving a country called Egypt. That only happened after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived. But the spiritual concept of leaving Egypt, the blueprint of the Torah, precedes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and there's the element of what's called Yitzis Mitzrayim, transcendence, as I discussed many times in this class. The concept of leaving, what is Mitzrayim? Mitzrayim are all the limitations and inhibitions and narrow spaces of our lives. That concept existed long before the Jews actually left Egypt. Then there came a point in history when it actually took place in a physical sense of the word. So basically, the Torah, what we have here, was the Torah in its pure form, before it took on the shape of these stories. Alpayim shana kodma Torah la'olam, the Medrash says, that the Torah precedes existence. If it precedes existence, the stories of it are all things that happen after existence came into play. So the answer is because the Torah in its root is a spiritual blueprint, and later took on shape and form in a particular way through the characters and episodes that the Torah describes. Now this may be a radical and revolutionary thing for many of you to hear for the first time, but this is not something my concept or my idea. This is ABC of understanding what the Torah truly is, and something that most of us were never taught. And frankly, if you don't know this, the whole Torah does not have real relevance. It's nice to say that God created us and told us do mitzvahs. But the main bottom line is missing. The Torah is a blueprint of existence. Why are these mitzvahs that important? Because this is the way the machine works. Just like when you come home with a computer, or a new gadget, or a new piece of equipment, and you want to make it work right, you have to follow a manual. The manual says do this and don't do this. If you do this, you make the machine work right. If you don't do this, you may damage the machine. The Torah is life's operator's manual, where the architect of existence, life, told us, here's what you do to make life function, and here's what you do to make life to damage life. So a mitzvah, for instance, let's say the mitzvah, the most basic one, charity, to be giving. So for many of us, the mitzvah of charity seems like a very logical one. You don't even need God to tell this to you, that it seems fair that if God blessed you with gifts, you should share with those that have less. It seems obvious and basic obligation. The fact that for thousands of years no country and many people didn't live by it, and even today they don't, is another story. But it makes sense to every person, at least logically, before our selfishness or greed comes into play. But you know something, it's much deeper than that. Charity, when you're a person who's blessed with the ability to give and gives, is not just for the person who's receiving, it's also for the person that's giving. There's an expression in the Medrash that said, Yeser, Mamasha balabayis, Eise ma'ani, ha'ani eise ma'balabayis. Does anybody know what that meant? It means that more than the giver gives to the taker, the receiver, more than the recipient receives from the giver receives from the recipient. Which seems counterintuitive. If you have someone who is blessed with wealth, say basic financial prosperity, or blessed with wisdom, and that person shares with someone that has less, it seems it's a one-way street. It seems like one of them is giving, the other one's receiving. To make a statement that the one that's giving is receiving more than the one that's receiving turns the whole concept on its head. How is that possible? So the answer is given. The answer is given. In the Medrash it says the following, coming to charity, that King David once asked God, when the great sages would and leaders would talk to God, they would always bring proofs from the Torah, because this was God's Torah. They brought proofs from the blueprint. It's the best way to make a case to God is by bringing proof from his own Torah. So King David once turned to God with a complaint and said, it says in your Torah, Li ha-kesef, v'li ha-zav, amanum Hashem, which means, God says, I have all the gold and the silver. So King David says, so why did you create with the wealthy and the poor? Why didn't you divide it equally? Why didn't you distribute wealth equally so you wouldn't have all the class systems and all the discrimination and all the abuse that we see people of wealth, how they use those that have less wealth, and the whole abuse of money and so on. It's a question in the Medrash. It's a question in the Medrash documents in the time of King David. So the question was asked long before any of us asked this question. And God's answer was also with a verse from the Torah. God said, Chesed ve'emes man yinritzarua, which means who then will do chesed and emes? Who will then do kindness in this world and truth if I distribute the wealth equally? Listen to this, how powerful a statement this is. In other words, God is saying, yes, I would have distributed the wealth equally, were all things equal. However, I wanted people to have the gift of chesed. I wanted people to show that they can be kind human beings. I wanted to show that they can give, that they be giving people. And that's a gift. God gave human beings the power to give, which, if you think about it, is a very powerful thing. We are mortal human beings. The argument could be made that we should be absolute parasites. Absolute parasites. What is it? Who is it that says it in, to quote a contemporary cinema? I think in the Matrix, the first one. So the machines tell Morpheus that you know what human beings are like. You're like bacteria. Wherever you go, you're just parasites. You just eat up the resources and then just move on. So you can make the argument, a strong argument, that human beings are essential parasites. I know nobody likes to look at themselves here, but we always look at others that way. So being mortals and so vulnerable and so dependent on others, you could say we need food to eat, we need air to breathe, we need clothing, we need shelter, we need all the time. We're full of needs. Who doesn't have needs? And then needs have evolved into the 21st century version of called issues. When your needs are not met, you have issues. And then we have therapists who come to help us with our issues to get our needs met. But it's all driven by needs. And since a human being is a needy human being, and the needs go not just physical needs, and there's nurturing and intimacy and validation, and then someone looked at you the wrong way, etc., etc. So, with taking that into account, you can make the argument that human beings are basically takers, not givers. Yet God said, I wanted chesed in this world. I wanted to show human beings have the power to give. As weak as some of us may think we are, and fragile, and needy, you also have something to give, which is, of course, the ultimate sign of dignity, majesty of the human spirit. A person who takes, even though you may be addicted to hoarding and taking, never feels as good as a person who gives. Giving gives you confidence. You know you have something to give. You have something that others can benefit from. You can illuminate the world, not just take. So God said, I wanted to give, the gift of giving. So therefore, I bless some people with more. Not because that they are smarter or because they figured out more ingenious, because they're superior to those that have less, but because I entrusted them with the wisdom that they should learn to give of what they were given. In other words, God is basically entrusting and giving people extra that's not really theirs. And their choice is, will they actually understand that, or will they think that they earned it and it belongs to them? Will they understand that what was given to them, that is extra, that they don't need for their own lives and survival, is given to them as a gift, so they should be able to show that they can give in this world. That's the concept of blessings in life. That's how the Torah looks at a blessing. And that was God's answer to King David, why I created, did not distribute wealth equally. The fact that people abuse it and do not appreciate it and do not use it for that reason, that's because people are people and we have free will. But as it says in another place, when one of the philosophers Roman philosophers asked Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah says, if God didn't want to have sun worshippers and moon worshippers, people who worship idols, he should have destroyed the sun and the moon. So Rabbi Akiva wisely answered, he said, V'chi mipnei hashetim ya'abed Hashem aseilamei. Will then God destroy his world because of fools? Fools don't understand the beauty of the sun and the moon, and instead they end up worshiping it. Is God going to destroy his world because some people don't and know how to appreciate the gifts that were given. So the Tesis Yontiv, a commentary in the Mishnah, asks a very good, great follow-up question. He says, the philosopher should ask the next question. Why didn't God destroy the fools? Not the sun and the moon. And he answers, of course, he didn't ask that question because he understood free will. That's the free will we have. Will we be a fool or will we be wise? And this is true not just for the sun and the moon. This is true for every gift. Technology itself. There were those that argued that you can't use technology for any good purposes because you turn on television or radio or other technologies are used all the time for things that are not necessarily very holy or healthy. Much of it is commercial. But the question is, who created technology? That's not man-made creations like the sun and the moon. It's an enormous power implanted in nature that just took thousands of years for human beings to discover. The technologies that we are accessing today are based on the manipulation of subatomic particles. Microchip, cellular technology, fax machines, airwaves, sound waves. These are not man-made. The man-made, what the human beings do is create the tools to access so-called solar energy, nuclear energy, atomic energy. But the energy itself is not man-made. So these are divine forces in existence from the beginning of time that we have the choice. Are you going to use it as a wise person, understand this is a gift to help give to the world, or will it be used for selfish purposes or even destructive purposes? So to go back to my point I was making was that the mitzvahs in the Torah are not just about humanitarian ethical laws. Charity is more for the giver than for the taker. Yes, it definitely creates a balance in this world, that those that have more share with those that have less. That's a basic, simple process, part of it. But something richer, more powerful, is that the blueprint of existence, the Torah says, you want to be a healthier person, be a giving person. You're not just doing your obligation to help others. The chesed in your heart, the love in your heart, needs to be exercised and needs to be used. So just like we exercise different muscles of the body, there's also muscles in the soul. The soul has powers, faculties. If you don't use your mind will get rusty. If you don't use your chesed, the love in your heart will get rusty. When a person gives charitably, they're not just helping those that are receiving, they're helping themselves even more. Because that's what makes existence work in a healthy way. And if you go through every detail of the Torah's story, you'll find every detail, every story, every episode, even the laws in the book of Leviticus that talk about purity, impurity, about the offerings, about things that don't exist physically today because of we don't have the temple. But in spiritual way speaking, each part is another part of the blueprint of life. One of my dreams, I don't know if I'll ever get to it, was to try to write I would call definitive, but a comprehensive description of the Torah in this way, to go through every verse in the Torah and explain how it's part of the blueprint of existence. We have articles and different documents that have done pieces of it, but no one has ever done it in a comprehensive way. To me, that would be the biggest contribution one could. It's really actually a lifetime's work. I don't think one person can do it. But that would be ultimately, if you want to really decipher why is the Bible, the Torah, such a powerful book, is because it's the story of your life. Imagine someone can give you an operator's manual that will describe you from head to toe, not the way you think you are, the way you really are, in graphic detail of what your soul looks like. No one has ever seen a soul. Does anyone in this room know how many faculties you have, how much potential you have, how many talents you have? Most people discover their talents by accident. It's a fact. You go to summer camp or school, there's a project, no one else there to do it, or the guy that did it didn't show up, and he suddenly falls on you, and you suddenly discover, hey, you're not so bad at it. No, how many people can say that they really had a parent or mentors that said, listen, here's a list of your 50 talents, and here's how you'll do to actualize them. As a matter of fact, most of our education systems, and even at home, actually does everything to stunt our talent, not actually to make it flourish. So how many talents do you really have? What kind of potential do you carry inside of you? Can anyone answer that question in this room? And you may think you can, but I told you my unscientific survey that I did last year, and I've been doing it again now just to verify, to make sure. that is still consistent in 2009. You want to know the survey?
Yeah, I know the survey.
Okay. You heard it here first. Okay. I asked around 150 people of different ages, from 10 to 90, literally. Men, women, Jew, non-Jew, religious, not religious, people from all kinds of backgrounds. As I said, it's not a scientific survey by no means, but it still it worked like it was. You can test it yourself. You can verify it. Try it out. And the question was like this: simple question. Well, not so simple, but it sounds simple. From 1 to 100, with 100 being 100%, how much do you know of yourself? So if 100 would mean you know everything about yourself, and 1 would mean 1 out of 1%, and the less than 1, of course, is less. So without any exception, literally, the younger the person, the higher the percentage. So like a 15-year-old, the answer was, I know like 65, 70% of myself. And by the time I'm 25, I'll know like 90. You asked a 40-year-old, the reversed, maybe 10%, and then a 90-year-old, and I asked 2-3 90-year-olds that I know. And the answer was maybe 1%, 2%. So I asked myself the question, it doesn't make any sense. The older you get, the more experience you have, the more you should know about yourself. But the answer is obvious as you climb the mountain of life and the horizons broaden. So yes, you know more, but you also see the broader horizon. Can anyone know, is it even fathomable, can we even fathom the depths of a person's potential and soul? They say a person uses less than 5% of their brain power. What did that say? I know you know some people like that, but they say everybody does. And here, look at this fact. Here's the human body, barely 5-6 feet tall, 100 to whatever pounds. Let's say 100, 200 pounds plus. Okay. Not everyone in this room. I know. I understand. I'm just. And we know less about this entity than we know about things millions of miles away in outer space, than things in the deep depths of the sea. Ask any good doctor, scientist. They'll tell you, all the medical advances, and there have been great ones. We've conquered many, many diseases. But do we really understand many things in the human body? The areas of fertility, for instance. It's a mystery, even for the greatest masters. The brain, forget about the science of the brain. They're just beginning to touch parts of it. So when you talk about what we know, what we don't know, it's nice to be arrogant and say, I know everything about life, like I'm self-aware. But self-awareness requires also understanding how much more there is to know. They say in 1898, talk about like a summation of the year 2008, 1898, 1899. Now I hear it's a urban legend. The debate rages on. Doesn't matter. It sounds a good story regardless whether it's true or not. That the patent officer of the United States resigned, saying that everything that could be discovered has been discovered, and there's no purpose, there's no point for me to be sitting. There's no need for a patent office. In 1898. So yes, electricity was discovered, the steam engine was discovered, turbines, the whole things of the industrial revolution were all discovered. But we did not yet have Einstein's relativity theory, we did not have quantum mechanics, and no computers, and no airplanes, and no automobiles. What about today? Would anyone make that statement today? The answer is no. The more we know how much more there is to know. Now this is not meant to tell us that we know nothing. It's just to tell us that the potential of a human being, the potential of life, is far beyond the scope of any individual. So if someone tells you now that the Torah is a blueprint for life, that it opens up you, and you study it, you will find parts of yourself that you would never have known on your own. And it resonates. I'm not here to prove anything. To me, the greatest proof of all these deeper secrets is not mathematical proofs or scientific proofs. Many of us are wise enough to know that for every proof that God exists, there's also a proof, there's also an argument that God doesn't exist, and vice versa. Karl Popper, the philosopher of science, said long ago that a scientific theory is based on one principle. You have to be able to disprove it. And he gives the example. To say God exists, for instance, is not a scientific theory because you can't disprove it. Therefore, you can't prove it either. There are realities that you have to either accept or not accept. So then how do we come to conclusions about that area of life? So there's a thing called experiential proof. You also can't prove that music touches you. If someone said to you, listen to this piece of music, it's going to transport you to another time and place. It'll lift your soul. And you'll say, prove it to me. So listen, we'll hook you up to monitors, and your brain sensors, and your heartbeat, and your pulse, and you'll see, listen to the music, you'll see the sensors will start jumping. Is that going to be proof that music touches you? Music touches you because you listen to it, and you see it touches you. It's called experiential proof. It's more powerful than empirical proof. It touched me, I don't really care whether there's sensors or not. And if it touches you and the sensors don't go up, it doesn't mean anything to you. That's the ultimate way the Torah makes its claim. Study me, taste of the music, and you tell me whether it illuminates and dimensions in you that you would not have known on your own. And if it does, how did the Torah know it? And the answer is, because if it's a true blueprint of existence and a blueprint of life, it will give you a psychological profile of yourself better than any man-made one, because it's coming from the engineer of life itself. Now this is just a claim the Torah makes. Whether one accepts it or not, the only way you cannot accept it is by trying it and saying it didn't happen. That's the challenge that we all have. So this take on Torah is what the Alter Rebbe meant when I began earlier, to live with the times. So some people live with the New York Times, as I said. But to truly live with the times, the New York Times, as my grandfather used to tell me, and I always used to dismiss him as a we call it a poyer, how do you say it in English? A peasant. From Russia, what is it? He used to tell me, everything in a newspaper is a lie. Now it was also nice because my father was a newspaper man, so it was interesting what his opinion was about his son-in-law. So everything in the newspaper is a lie, even the date, because they printed it last night. They say it's today's newspaper. As I got older, and I'm still getting older, beginning tonight, I came to realize that it's not actually it wasn't such a Kleinstädtel, what's the word, small town peasant concept. There's a certain truth to it. So he has the venerable New York Times that many of us, and I grew up with it as well, cannot live without. You start realizing who decides what's a headline, what's on the front page, what's not on the front page. So I understand if there's an earthquake in China or there's a war in the Middle East, certain objective news. But most of the articles are not necessarily objective news. It's somebody struck someone's fancy. So I'm not saying every article is bought off. There's many ways that you can influence how articles get positioned and so on and so forth. So the New York Times is the Times. The Jews knew, and they never took seriously newspapers, because yesterday's newspaper is tomorrow's wrapping for your lever. They always knew that there were certain timeless things, that when you understood their timeliness, then you can live with the times. And that when you looked into a story, an episode in a chapter, and you're able to understand how it illuminates this time period that we're in now, and this part of the world in which we live in, and our internal lives, that's called living with the times. Because that's something that has both eternal power and it is also contemporary. So, as we come to the end of a solar year, and you're going to hear a lot of commentaries about what kind of year this was. Some comparing it to 1931 because the Dow Jones, the losses were the second greatest losses since 1931. And if the last 2 days it wasn't a loss, it would have been even greater than the crash of 1907. It's not that I'm a big whiz about financial things. I just picked it up lately as they're summing up the year. And it's going to go down because people live now in the moment. People are in a very depressed state. And when you look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, in Israel, it doesn't contribute to optimism. One day I just was speaking to someone who's going to fight in Gaza as they're about to enter, and a soldier who I know. I just spoke to him this morning, and he told me that the most demoralizing thing on the front, he says, it's one thing we made a decision to go to war, you just go to war. Here, you suddenly hear the politics start coming into play, and which is unheard of in history. There's no battle ever fought that the soldiers are suddenly told that maybe you're not going to war, You're talking about thousands of young people who are been told we're going for a war, a just war, and then suddenly politics takes over. I mean, it's insanity to imagine what's really going on over there. And it doesn't give you very much hope in leadership in Israel, because whatever, you know. So it's one thing, you don't want to go to war, don't go to war. But once you go, you don't, since when do you stop a war in the middle? This was the mistake done in Lebanon, but I'm not going to go into a whole discussion here, especially I know that in New York you can get into big hot water. People have debates about this. I mean, I can tell you clearly it's not about a hawkish stand or not a hawkish stand. You're surrounded by enemies, and you have to make a decision. If you're going to live in Israel, you have to know you're living in a hostile environment. A hostile environment is called, in the laws of the universe, a state of war. A state of war has to be treated as certain. You declare war when you're in a state of war. You cannot live in a warlike state and make believe like you're not at war. You want to leave and go to the French Riviera, by all means. But if you're going to live in an environment where your neighbors and people around you are telling you that you are their enemy, and they're dedicated, their charter dedicated to destroying you, that's called a state of war. War has been declared against you. I don't think in history you will find. Only the crazy Jews are capable of this paradox. And in history, there's someone declared war against you, and you don't want to accept that it's a declaration of war. What does that mean? If you don't want to declare war, okay, that's your choice. But someone declared war against you, you have no choice. Hitler declared war, first against the Jews, then against the countries around him, and then against the world. And therefore the world had to go to war, whether they liked it or not. War was declared again. War has been declared against Israel, not today, not yesterday. So this distortion is one that the Jews are feeding, and I think, frankly, the Jews can be their own worst enemy. That's my commentary about that. There's a lot more to talk about it, and since I have a pen, I plan to write about it. So you'll have to indulge me. But I mean, there's no real words for it because the insanity of it is beyond. And I understand people are going to start arguing, but you have to live with them and live in peace with the Arab world. Yeah, listen, as I said, the Nazis declared war. And no one made that statement, you're going to have to live at peace with them. You went to war until you win the war, until there's unconditional surrender, period. Now, why did they insist on unconditional surrender at the end of World War II? Berlin was bombed. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. Japan. Why was unconditional? Give them a little, let them save face. A little pride. Won't be unconditional. It'll be conditional surrender. Because in wars, there has to be a clear winner and a clear loser. That's the only way you can rebuild. As long as the loser thinks that they're not complete loser, the war continues. So unconditional is part of the way wars are fought. Nobody likes it, but that's the way it is. And this is the situation until the Middle East, till Israel discovers that. I think we're going to have this slow bleeding death. And I mean, we sit here in luxury and talk about it here in the United States, but it's our own brothers and sisters, and it's embarrassing to see Jews who are always known for their intelligence to behave with such stupidity. The only way I can understand or explain it is because, when Moshe Dayan, and I don't want to be negative, but there's really no choice when you're dealing with a situation like this. I don't know if you know the history of the 6-Day War, but when the war was being fought, and that was a decisive war, that's why it took 6 days. Besides the miracles from heaven, it was because the people were decisive, there was no second guessing, there was no maybe, maybe not. You just forged ahead and that was it. They knew who the enemy was. So the momentum was being built to the point that they were about to enter into Jerusalem. And as tragic as this may sound, the leadership of Israel did not want their army to go into Jerusalem. Moshe Dayan, who was then the chief of staff, said, and this is documented in the memoirs and diaries, we don't need, he said, this Vatican City. He saw Jerusalem as just being a complicated situation with the three religions, Christianity, Islam, and so on. But the soldiers were so enthusiastic. Jerusalem has such sentimental value. And the whole country was caught up in the euphoria, there was no choice. Now when they finally conquered the wall, the Western Wall, the photo ops, you see them all smiling and as if they're the big conquerors, but they were trying to stop it. They couldn't. Now, listen what happened. The Mufti, the guy, the Imam, or whatever he's called, on the Temple Mount, the Muslim, so they're losers now of a war. So Mr. Dayan ran after him with the keys and said, here, I want to give you the keys back for the Temple Mount. And he turned his back. The loser turned his back on the winner, not taking the keys from him. Tell me what that means. The only way to explain this, that intelligent people can stoop to such I don't know what the word for it is because, I guess, if you're going to live in Israel, either you're going to have a vision, or you don't belong there. If you do not have a spiritual vision, you do not belong in that land, because you're not living among friends. If you live somewhere else in the world and there's no one attacking you, so fine, live your indulgent life. You don't have to stand for anything. You don't need a vision. I'm not saying that's healthy, but at least you can get away with it maybe for a while. In Israel, you cannot get away with it. The Hamas, not the Hamas, I think, Al Qaeda or Hamas wrote once in their paper, in Arabic, it was translated, that the Jews don't belong in Israel because they're not ready to fight for it all the way. Can you imagine? That this is the enemy saying about the Jewish people. So, I speak about it because it's painful, it's going on right now, and I believe that we are all responsible to be aware and not to be stupid about these things. And getting into debates about peace with people who declared war against you is, to me, insanity in the first place. The ones who declared war, they've declared war, it would be the equivalent, literally, of Hitler declaring war, and then blaming yourself why you were fighting with him. The ones who declared war, they made their decision, now there are consequences when you do that. Period. The only thing is, the only second guessing comes because if you're not confident that you really belong there. If you don't belong there, so leave Israel. I mean, God forbid. The Jews or the leaders that feel that they want to, their dream was to have cafes and nightclubs in Tel Aviv, and now they're not at peace with that. So maybe it's not the place to be. Maybe Uganda or France or somewhere else where it works. And this is the tragic reality that unfortunately is affecting lives and lives, because it's going to be slow bleeding. It's not decisive. It's not. Is it a war or is it not a war? You still will not have an answer to that question. And the debate rages on. And of course, the world is not necessarily lovers of Jews, so they see Jews themselves are second guessing themselves. What do you think? Of course, it's not going to help support in any given way. Now, what does this have to do with New Year's? Who cares what it has to do or doesn't have to do? It's happening now, and it's part of the so-called summation of the year as we enter the new year. And some of our colleagues are freezing by the ball being dropped in Times Square. We are sitting here in the warmth of a comforting oasis here, and doing what I think Jews can do best, which is we live in the times, but to go back to the theme here, but we also know how to transcend the time, which is what I want to say about the entire summation of the year. Many people, there's an expression in the Talmud that goes like this: talk about astrology, about the stars. So I don't know how many of you will only date people who have a particular sign, or have other things that are and how much you think it controls your life. But I will tell you that the Talmud says, "Ein mazel Yisrael," which means that Jews don't have a mazel. They're not controlled by the mazel. And it quotes a verse that says, "Do not be like those nations that allow themselves to be controlled by the mazolos, by the stars." But then the question is asked, a very obvious question. We do say mazel tov, right? Yeah. And as you know, mazel tov is said right off, right? Part of your industry. And mazel tov means that your mazel should be good. We say the word mazel. And the word mazel is used quite often in Jewish discussions. And not just as a cliche. It has basis in the Torah as well. You have the concept of a mazel. For instance, we say in the month of Adar, the mazel is dogim, the mazel is fish, it's a mazel of simcha, it's a time of simcha, joy. And the month of Av, the antithesis, the mazel is Aryeh, it's a month of sadness. So we do find in Jewish calendar and Jewish times, we do find things, and not only that, it controls our behavior. We don't do simchas, we don't do weddings in the 3 weeks, in the days between Passover and Shavuos. We do weddings during the Adar, etc. And as I said, Mazel Tov. So, how could the Talmud just make the statement, Ein Mazel Yisrael? And then you find in the Zohar, not only Zohar, in the Talmud as well, you have people who are born the Mazel Madim, for example. What's Madim in English? Mars? Or what is it in the astrological signs? Anyway, Mazel Madim. So the Talmud says that a person who's born Mazel Madim is an aggressive person. Talmud continues and says he'll either be a murderer or a shaykhit, or a slaughterer of meat. Depends. But one way or other, he's going to shed blood. Very encouraging. I wasn't born in that
Good
month.
we don't know which one it is.
Sorry?
Good we don't know which one it is.
Well, that's the free will a person has. You know what our great scholar Isaac Bashevis Singer said? He said that we must believe in free will. We have no choice. That's what he said. So is that a mazel thing or not? So you find this contradiction. The answer is actually quite simple. The answer is it's your choice. It's your choice. You know, a lot has been made about the book The Secret, The Power of Attraction. I'm not getting into her motivations, the money behind it. She definitely, her lessons definitely applied. She wanted to make a lot of money through a book, and she made it. So she dreamt about money. She wrote a book. Okay. The author from Australia, I forgot her name. I'm sure there's someone here that's... Now, the power which in Yiddish there's an expression, trach gut wird sein gut. Think good will be good. Now some people dismiss that like, a nice statement. Grandmothers tell you don't feel so bad, think good will be good, and go to sleep, and the boogeyman will disappear. The truth is, it's a statement that comes from Kadesh Elyon, from holy people, not from a dismissive statement to tell little children to sleep calm, peacefully. What does it mean? It's essentially the concept that today has been known, is becoming more and more popular, that as your neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. You can write that down, that's a rhyme. As the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. Which means our attitudes shape our reality. Obviously, God forbid, somebody's in an accident, and part of they have something is severed. You're not going to just think good, and suddenly your limb is going to grow back. God forbid. But most of the areas of our life are defined by our attitudes. Just to give you a simple example. If you're in a sour mood or in a bad mood about something, what kind of people are you going to attract? People who are either like that, who love, misery loves company. You're not going to attract people who are upbeat and smile. They don't want to be around people that are sour. Why would they want to be around you? So then when someone says, look, I can't find any good friends. All my friends are just, they don't bring me any help. The question is, what are you doing to attract or to repel or to attract different types of people around you? You don't think you give off vibes? There are people that have charisma and they have certain vibes that attract people to them. And there's certain things we can do that repel people. That's on a very basic level. I don't know if any of you saw that film that was like a whole thing a few years ago, What the Bleep Do We Know? And it was a very interesting film about how our attitudes affect our environment. So they brought there a study, which I don't know how accurate it is or not, this Japanese researcher, I forgot what his name is. He called Secrets of Water or something like that, The Secret of Water. You familiar with that?
Yeah.
Where, as I said, I don't know if it was verified or not, but it's definitely an interesting hypothesis. And he says like this, that he did research, he documents research, listen to this, water crystals under a microscope. In a room where there's a lot of bad energy, meaning anger, rage, jealousy, a lot of bad vibes, and the water crystals changed shape. They became grotesque looking. And then the same water crystals, the same water drops, he put in a room that had a lot of happiness and joy and optimism and friendship, camaraderie, and the water crystals turned into these beautiful, exquisite shapes. Now, it may sound miraculous. The truth is, if you're familiar with quantum mechanics, it's altogether not miraculous. This is common knowledge today. As weird as it sounds, we affect the atoms around us. It's been proven and documented time and again, and completely counterintuitive, that for some reason or other, the atomic structure, subatomic structure of existence can sense the observer that's observing it. When this was first posited in the 20s by Werner Heisenberg and other physicists, it was dismissed as insanity. It was always, no, what do you mean? I look at this wall is not affected by my looking at it. And the answer is the wall is not affected, but the subatomic particles are. No one can understand why, but it's been proven again and again that that's the case. You can check it out. Now this shouldn't be surprising to anyone that's familiar with spirituality. There's actually a book by Fridtjof Capra called The Tao of Physics, where he documents the parallels between mysticism, Eastern mysticism, and quantum mechanics. He's a physicist. Changed his name to some Eastern name. So this is common knowledge when you talk about spirituality, because the universe as we know it, we only see the external, we don't see the inner workings. So I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, there was this at the TED conference, there was this woman, neuroscientist, who gave this fascinating lecture about the right brain and left brain, and she unfortunately was in the position where she could talk about it from first-hand experience, because she had a stroke. If you want to hear that lecture, send me an email. I'll send you a link to it. And this is a complete secular scientist we're speaking about. You will not believe her language. It's as religious as you'll ever hear. She says clearly that the right brain and the left brain do not think the same. They think opposite ways. The left brain thinks in details, and the right brain thinks about everything as a field of energy. It's quite amazing, her talk. But you'll see, if you study these things, you'll see the parallels. That the universe as we know it on the external is a fragmented composite of unrelated pieces. When you know the inner workings, it's a united field of energy. This is common. Our lives are also that way. We have a soul within that's a united force. But think of your life in actuality. It's a bunch of fragments, which in a way is a contradiction, which is why we are so anxious. We are anxious. We get anxious because the inner and the outer are not consistent. Your life in most cases is a sum of a bunch of details. Details that are distracting, that are about survival, about your mother, about your father, about your childhood, about all the psychological scars we carry. The inner unity of a person's soul rarely really makes an appearance. So what we do is we've learned in this Western world to compartmentalize, and we create time for meditation, for reading, for romance, for love, for music. Music, it became a big experience. It became a way of relieving the outer anxiety. Music. You go to a rock concert, it has replaced essentially a cathedral. It's almost like a prayer, a communal prayer of souls communing. So we live in a world where there's this dichotomy between the outer and the inner. And I go back to what I was saying before about the Torah. The Torah was always meant to be a compass that was meant to not allow us to get caught up with the moment. So here we have an economic meltdown, as they call it. And it's affecting people, and it's affecting, I'm sure, people in this room. And above all, it's affecting moods. I think it's even more psychological than it is financial. Many people, not necessarily directly impacted financially, even though I think the impact is on everyone in some way. But above all, it's the attitudes people have. Fear, uncertainty, what's going to happen. What the Jewish people can contribute to the human race today is that fear is the force that either controls or destroys your life. What I mean by that is, this is where the Ein Mazel Yisrael that I was speaking about before. You decide your destiny. If you want to bind yourself to the moments and the ups and downs of the marketplace, or other ups and downs of life, the year 2008 was full of ups and downs, especially economically, but also in other ways, then you will be controlled by the mazel of your life. When the Talmud is saying a Jew does not have a mazel, that's not saying that you can't have a mazel. It means you have the ability to transcend your mazel. That's what it means. So yes, there is a certain structure in time, the ups and downs of the calendar, where certain months are healthier, are more conducive to joy, others are sadder months. But does that control your destiny? Absolutely not. Look at the Holocaust that decimated a third of the Jewish people. What happened to most Jews that came out of the Holocaust? As painful as it was, and there's no question that people lost their entire families. You can't even, it's hard to imagine when you sit with a Holocaust survivor, a person who literally lost every brother and sister, father and mother, grandparents, communities, and still the person came out and some way rebuild their life. No one knows that mystery. It's not like the person is in denial and forgot the pain. and is able to escape, and I'm building my life, and I forget. You never forget these things. It's a person who did not allow the mazel, so to speak, the realities on the ground to affect. That's where you go up to a higher place. That's what Jews are always capable of doing. I mentioned this many times. I'm always amazed by this. And I went to yeshiva, so you'd almost take it for granted, but if you step back a moment, and you look at the history of the time when Rashi wrote his commentary. So who doesn't know Rashi? Everyone knows the commentary of Rashi. A man who lived in the 11th century wrote this brilliant and simple commentary on the Bible and on Talmud. It's considered today impossible to study Chumash or Talmud without Rashi. And now he wasn't the only one. There was the Ramban a little later. And there were those before and after him. Now you read their commentary, you talk about hundreds and hundreds of pages of brilliant, focused commentary. Now I'm a writer. I don't know, you don't even have to be a writer to appreciate this. But as a writer, you know to write, you need focus. There's no way you're writing when you're distracted. You have to be able to write, you have to focus. Especially if you're writing a precise commentary where every word counts. Okay? Now, if you just would read the commentaries alone, you'd think they must have been living in such peaceful times. On a beachside, beachfront property, relaxing in some type of hammock maybe, and picnicking and barbecuing, the calm. Today, you read an author, you can find out how dysfunctional his mother was and how dysfunctional his father was and alcoholics and the whole... Today, when they deconstruct literature, you can identify every stupid little detail the person lived through. I'd like you to be able to make a psychoanalysis of Rashi through his commentary. You will not know what kind of mother he had, what kind of father. You will not know that he was living in a time where blood was spilling in the streets, where a pogrom and the Crusades could have been destroying cities around him and in his city. You wouldn't know it. And he's not one. Jews lived, thousands of Jews wrote hundreds of thousands of pages of commentary. And nowhere do you find pessimism, negativity, sadness. Why is it so difficult? You don't even hear them complaining to God why it's so tough. So you have to say, where did they have that composure and peace of mind to be able to sit in a city called Worms in France, or other cities throughout Europe, where they say there's more blood in the rivers of Europe than Jewish blood than water. Where do they have that peace of mind, that presence, to be able to sit and write? And I said, not one, hundreds and hundreds. So if you want to be a cynic, you could say they were all not living in reality. They were ignoring. But that's ridiculous. It's their children. It was their colleagues. It was their brothers and sisters. People were being killed. People were being expelled from one country to the other. Forget about the oppression and so on. The only answer is that they inherited a power from something before them that will enable them to rise above the immediate moment. And they said to themselves that if I allow myself to succumb to the negativity of our time, we will never see the end of this. And I want my children, if not me, to make it through. Now, you could say if you were living then, it was wishful thinking. But now we're living in the 21st century. And we are the children, the boys and girls, the sons and daughters of these people. And they were right. They did see it through. So though they did not merit to live in peaceful times, their children and grandchildren did. What does that tell you? It's the greatest story of history. The story of a nation that would not bow to Haman, not just physically, but also psychologically. And because they didn't bow to the moments, that's why they were able to survive. What happened to the Romans? The Romans were the greatest empire in all of history. You have this fascinating series, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. More wealth, more power, more ambition than any nation that ever lived. But it's not just the Romans, the Babylonians in their times, and the Assyrians, and the Persians, and the Greeks, and the Spanish, and the Portuguese, and the British Empire, and then earlier, throughout history, the Egyptians, etc., etc. What was their ultimate destruction? Why did they all get destroyed? So some people say that, that's God's hand. God wanted the Jews to continue, but these nations not. It's not. It's much more complicated than that. They were their own destruction because they lived in the time. Their power was only the power of the moment. They did not know how to transcend moments. So when the tragedy struck, when an earthquake hit Greece, or when the Roman Empire began to fight with themselves, there was no one there to transcend from the time. Jews never took seriously the moments that they were in, even their prosperous moments, and therefore also their sad moments. Transcendence was the secret to their survival in Egypt and in every exile since then. And this is not just a lesson for Jews, it's a lesson for us all. So I know everyone's talking so much about how difficult these times are. You have to put things a little in context. I'm not dismissing any of the losses, I'm not dismissing any of the challenges. But if you cannot rise above it, if you have nothing in your life that gives you the ability to rise above it, whether it's your children or your love in your life or some text, you don't even have to write a Rashi commentary, just to be able to study it in a way that gives you ability to transcend the moment, you will then be mazel, yes, you will then be controlled by your own affairs. So it's in our hands. When the Talmud says "Ein mazel Yisrael," it means it's a matter of choice. That doesn't mean that there is no such thing as a mazel, there is no such thing as so-called predispositions. We're all born with certain dispositions. We're all born with genetic and hereditary traits. That's not our choice. The question is how you will use it. I remember, you all remember good old O.J. Simpson? You know, the glove don't fit, you gotta quit. So, I think I told this story here. O.J. Simpson was acquitted in that big case with Jimmy, what was his name? Cochran, Johnny Cochran. Sorry, John. Right, good old John. It was Erev Yom Kippur, if you may remember. The day before Yom Kippur, what year was it? 91? No. 95, right? 96 maybe. 95? Okay. So I was scheduled, my book, Torah Meaning for Life, had just come out then. It was just released that September, right before. And I was scheduled to be in a radio interview on Erev Yom Kippur in the morning with a Miami radio show, by phone. And I get a call like 2 days earlier, and the producer said, or a day earlier, the producer says, you know, that tomorrow will be the day that OJ's, the verdict will be delivered, and that's going to be the talk of the town, so I love your book, but it's not a good time. No one's interested in your book right now. They're going to be interested in OJ Simpson. That's the topic. So, you know, I was taught you have to grab every opportunity, so I said, okay, so we'll talk about O.J. Simpson. She says, but your book doesn't address it. I said, my book does address it. I had no clue knowing how it addresses it, but I just said it does. So she said, really? Okay, great, so I don't have to go find another guest. We'll talk. It's an hour-and-a-half interview. Great. It was a long interview. It was like a whole discussion. Maybe an hour, I presume. So, okay, I had no clue what I was going to say. Next morning, it's live radio, so you got to have something to say. And but it's always, pressure is always good. So, yeah, he was acquitted. So that was the news. Everybody was talking about it. And if you know Erev Yom Kippur, of course, in a community like mine in Crown Heights or other communities like that, they're busy with their running to the mikvahs and kreplach and a lot of other things going on besides O.J. Simpson. So we started the interview. So what's your opinion? So I said, well, I want to start with a story. And I told the story of Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever. It's a Yom Kippur story. Where he got up, he used to daven by the Amid, he was a chazan, he was a cantor, and he said, before he started his Kaddish, he said the following, he says, in Yiddish he spoke, he said, the Prussians say that their emperor is the greatest. The Russians say that their czar is the greatest. The French say that their king is the greatest. And ich, he says, I, Levi Yitzchak ben Sarah Sasha, says, Yiskadol v'yiskadol Shmei Rabba, meaning that God is the greatest. So I said, I have to tell you that while everybody's so busy with O.J. Simpson, there are millions of Jews don't even know his name, and busy now with Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, entering the Holy of Holies, and so on. So I just want to put things in context that not everybody is consumed with O.J. Simpson. Now, I knew that wasn't going to fly so well. That was not what she wanted. But she says, well, okay, very interesting. Anything else? You know, because she was getting disappointed, because I told her that I have something to say. So I did come up with something. I pulled something out of my hat. I said, well, let me tell you this. The book, Torah Meaning for Life, there's a story there with the Rebbe, when Mayor Dinkins, the black mayor of New York, came to, or African-American, I should say, came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So you all know in the summer of 91 there were the riots, or pogrom, some called it, in Crown Heights, and I actually was honored to be there during that summer. I remember that night very vividly, and it was a real pogrom. It was not exaggerated. Mobs were walking the streets and busting the windows. And that was the night when they killed Yankel Rosenbaum in cold blood. After the tragic accident with the Gabe and Cato, the little black child. So no one denying there was an accident, but it was not exactly, as the New York Times put it, that the Jews killed the black and the blacks killed the Jew. It wasn't exactly like that. But bottom line is that, there were big tensions, and that was, of course, some say Giuliani became mayor because of it, and anyway, Dinkins lost. And after that, New York turned around. Some say that was like the watershed moment where crime hit a low point. Well, whatever. I remember that. So Dinkins came to the Rebbe that summer for $1, and the Rebbe said to him, he said to the Rebbe, he says he wants to ask for a blessing, as mayor of the city, a blessing for peace between the two peoples. So the Rebbe answered him. He said, it's not two people, it's one people under one God. That's what he said. I quoted the story in my book. So I said, well, look, and this became the theme of our discussion. I'm just giving you the end of the story. It's not really the point I wanted to make. I said the O.J. Simpson has brought, you see, throughout the country, what happened was all the blacks were cheering, and all the whites were cursing. That's how he got away with such a crime. Why the blacks cheering? Because this became a racial thing. And I said, until we don't have a solution where we see that there's a God that's beyond and transcends all the differences, we will never really resolve. That was my point anyway. We will elaborate. It came out very good. There were questions, there was callers. She was happy. I just wanted to tell you that in case you're considering doing a radio interview with me, I'll stay on the topic. But the point I really was making was, so as we come to a conclusion of a year that has been volatile, and it's going to be probably more volatile as we go into the new year, and we have to remember something, put things into context. First of all, on a personal level, there's no such thing that you are in control of what will depress you or won't depress you. Do not think that events in the world are to control your life. If you think that, you are already doomed. I don't like to use that word, but the fact is you define your own doom by allowing yourself to be controlled by forces that don't have to control you. Now, it may not be it's easier said than done. What does a person do? They can't transcend. So I have 2 suggestions. New Year resolutions. That will work longer than like losing weight or other things like that. New Year resolutions. Heshi, want a few New Year's resolutions? Huh? That we do not become so addicted to our BlackBerry. Great. Send the message to everybody from me. This is the message. Listen. New Year resolution number 1. Hang around with people that will lift you to a place like that. That's the first easiest way. If you want a magic trick, a backdoor trick to get to a place of transcendence, don't always think you can just put your mind to it and meditate and you'll get there. Because if you are trapped in that place, and I'm not judging anyone that is trapped there, remember we are products of the media. We have become addicted to the inundation of the messages that are being drilled into us day after day after day. So it's not that simple to suddenly say, okay, cold turkey, I'm suddenly not going to be affected by the environment. When things were going well, everybody was happy to be affected by the environment. But now we are trapped there. So one of the ways is to find yourself people who are not trapped and hang around them. Because if you think you're going to, it means a person in fetters, trapped, cannot free themselves. When you're in a pit, you can't pull yourself out of it. So you have to find people that are not in the pit. I guarantee you that most of your friends are with you there. And that's what keeps you trapped. So it may be time to find a new friend. So resolution number 1 is we find a new friend that is not as trapped as you are, and that can maybe throw you a rope. And maybe that way you can also throw a rope to each other. It's not that difficult to do if you really intent on doing it. Unfortunately, many people, as I hear this all the time, say, okay, now we have to ride through this, and as soon as we ride through, we'll soon be back in the saddle, and everything will be fine again. Okay, well, that if you're living like that from moment to moment, and that's the way you decide to live, what can I tell you? I mean, you come here this evening, I don't think you want me to be here to just support that type of approach to life. I'm a believer that we can be much more than we think we can be, and that we have much greater potential than we think we have. And our challenge is to lift ourselves up to that type of place. Resolution number 2. It says, Ein lecha ben chayrin el misha esek b'teira. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers. There is no free person except the one that studies Torah. Now, it's an interesting statement. It doesn't say that everyone who studies Torah is a free person. It says you can't be free without the Torah. So how do you explain that? And look, there are a lot of people who are studying Torah every day, whether it's a Daf Yomi or other ways, and they're not such free human beings. They're just as trapped. So what is the Mishnah saying? The Mishnah is saying that the Torah, as I elaborated earlier, is a blueprint for life. If you want to be able to not be affected by existence, you have to go to a place from where existence originates from. To put it in scientific terminology, if you're a product of an environment, you can never transcend that environment. It's the rule of nature. If you're part of it, you cannot be above it. The only way to rise above any type of environmental conditions is to connect to something that's not part of that environment. That's why the Mishnah says freedom is in the domain only of the people who have mastered transcendence. There's no way you can be a free person on earth, because who's free? You have people you work for, you need money, you're dependent on others. What kind of freedom is that? Have any of us made true free choices? By the time you were old enough to make choices, your parents had sent you to different schools. They gave you an education. They programmed you one way or another. Even if it's a good programming, it's still not up to you. So you have one choice, really one choice. Either you go follow it, or you don't follow it. And many people will argue by breaking away, you're also part of the program. Because what's forcing you to break away? Because you felt you were programmed. So the program itself is causing you to rebel against it. So is there true freedom? That's a big question. Is there truly a free person? Is there such a thing as a true nonconformist? So for the Jewish people, the answer was always the Torah. If you can connect to the story, for instance, of this week's chapter, and understand its psychological impact, and one that have impacted people before you and generations before you, that lifts you to another place. That's in your hands. Basically, spiritual emancipation is the only solution for material entrapment. That's the way it is. So in other words, now, there are people who study Torah, but the problem is they're studying Torah in a very trapped way. You can study Torah very mechanically. You're just trained to do it. Or you like to do it. Some people like the stimulation of Talmudic debates. Others like mathematics, and they like Talmud. They're used to it. I remember I was once on a plane, and I saw a guy like maybe 6 seats ahead of me, and he had this big Gemara, Shas Vilna, one of these big, I don't know how he even got it on the plane, so big. But I guess he could have taken a small one. And he's learning. I was very impressed, he's taking 2 seats with the big Gemaras open. And then the meal comes. So I just happened to see that his meal is not what we call the kosher type. Not that the kosher type is for human consumption, but technically it's kosher, kosher chemicals. I don't know if you know this phenomenon, but on planes, people they don't leave one piece of rice on their thing. So I developed a theory, because on planes we're very vulnerable. You don't know when your next meal is going to be, and I think psychologically, you get this meal that on Earth, down on the ground, you wouldn't give it to your dog. The plane is like, whatever. What do you think about that? Scoop would not ever endorse such food, I'm not sure, right? Even in business class, it's more fancier and more plastic. So anyway, I see this meal comes to this guy, and it's intriguing me. Not that I was judgmental; he could eat whatever he likes. I don't really care. But it was a big Gemara and all this, so I decided, after the meal, I was bored anyway, so I decided I'm gonna take a little walk, and then see. So there was a seat, he was sitting in the middle aisle, so I sat like another side. It was Macht Rabid, how are you? And I see he's sitting without a kippah, and he has this Gemara, brachas, and he has just finished this meal, And again, it wasn't judgmental. I was just very curious. It just was intriguing to me. And he wasn't that older. He was he was a middle-aged guy. Anyway, so I just wanted to, I struck up a conversation with him, and I said to him, I see you're learning Masechta Brachos. So he said, yeah. He learns. He says he loves to learn. I said to him, I have a question on one of the pages here. So we turned to a page there, and the page that I was referring to, I said, it says here in Gemara that someone that studies Torah and doesn't make a blessing God on the Torah, will ultimately forsake the Torah. Can you explain to me what this means? So, in the beginning he didn't understand why I was asking, but then suddenly he got it. So he said to me, well, very simple, because the whole Torah is based on God giving it to us, and so on. And so if you just learn Torah as an academic exercise, and you forget there's a God, you're ultimately going to forsake the Torah. And then he smiled and he said to me, but you see, look, I didn't forsake the Torah, even though I did forsake God. So I said, well, your life isn't over yet. But it was just interesting to me, because here's an example, you can learn Torah and nevertheless be like an academic stimulation and not necessarily something that's personal. Bertrand Russell, the great philosopher and atheist, said once, when they asked him about how could you behave unethically, you're a professor of ethics, so he said, listen, I also teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. So he said, in other words, you can teach something and not be it. By contrast, the Rambam says in Hilchos Deis, chapter 5, he opens up and says, Ezu Chacham.
Who's wise?
Right. Who's the wise person? Or not Ezu Chacham, Chacham Nikr. How do you recognize a Chacham? So it says how he eats, how he drinks, how he does business, how he walks, how he talks, how he sleeps, the details of his life. That's a contrast between Bertrand Russell and the Rambam, if you want one. Lahavdil, if you want. Okay. In Judaism, there's no such thing as a perfect human being, but to deify and glorify that you're detached from what you're teaching because you're such a brilliant academic is considered to be abhorrent, which means you are what you teach and you teach what you are. And it's true, none of us are perfect, but to make it a statement, the statement is that if you want to really see somebody that's wise, you don't look at how smart they are and how brilliant their oratory skills are, you look at their behavior. Behavior is the ultimate litmus test of integration. Because in Judaism, wisdom is integration, it's not knowledge. Integration means it's part of who you are, it's part of your being, it's integrated. Unfortunately, a person can study Torah and not be integrated. This is called either a novel b'reshus HaTorah, you have a despicable person who does it in the name of Torah, or you have the concept of gamva apu machtar terachmon karya, which means in Aramaic, it means a thief, before he goes out to steal, he prays to God that he should succeed. How does that work? God told him in the Ten Commandments, "Le signif," you should not steal. So he goes to pray to God that told him not to steal. I want you to help me steal. It's one thing you ignore God, you don't invoke His name, but you're invoking His name to help you. That's somewhat of an insane type of behavior. But this is because faith can be non-integrated. A person could have faith and it's not part and parcel of who you are. That's why the Mishnah doesn't say someone who studies Torah is free, because that's not necessarily a guarantee. You can study Torah for the wrong reasons, even though it may be better than nothing. On the other hand, someone cannot be free without the ability to rise to a greater place. So my second suggestion for resolution number 2 is to designate time. There's a thing called kvias itim l'Torah, to actually designate time to study, whether it's once a week, once a day would be even better, but not just mechanically, to be yetzer, to just do it because it's an obligation, but actually to do it in a way to understand that here is a voice, no matter how bad your day is, no matter how the environment, how matter the climate of the world is, the psychological climate. You have a few moments that's like an oasis that lifts you to a greater place. So obviously I'm talking about study that actually does that type of lifting. So those are so far 2. Find yourself a friend that can be a lifting force, and the study. And finally, I would say a commitment that's connected to action. There was a custom by some tzaddikim, some rebbes, that after Simchas Torah, after the New Year, the end of the holiday season, they would always take upon themselves a new additional mitzvah or additional intensity of a mitzvah. So even though I'm not here to make a new minig, New Year's custom, New Year's is not necessarily in the Jewish calendar, but since everyone's talking about it anyway, so might as well use it for the good. So a New Year's resolution should be to actually do something that is giving. I've talked before about giving and taking. In life, you're either a giver or a taker. What I mean by that, of course, you can be both, but your predominant attitude is one to give to the world or to take. Now, taking may sound more pleasant, but it is definitely more demoralizing. You will see the happiest people in the world are the giving people. The saddest and most anxious people are the takers. Because when you're busy taking, you always need to have somewhere else to take from. When you're busy giving, it builds confidence that you have something to give. It's not about, you'll find giving people never scramble around and say, what am I going to give tomorrow? It's a personality thing. You always have something to give because you know you have it in you. You know you dig deeper. This doesn't always mean financially. There are people I know that are natural givers. And even now, when it's difficult for some who are financially tight, they don't stop giving. A giving person is a giving person. He's not looking for an excuse why not to give. He's not looking whether it's going to always benefit him. A giving person is a giving person by personality. So he finds one way, he finds another way. I have a friend that's a supporter of our organization, and yes, he's tighter, and he will never tell this to me, not just out of pride, because he's a giving person by nature. And it's fascinating to me how I know, behind the scenes, he doesn't even know that I know, how he goes out of his way to be giving, both financially and in other ways. And I learned tremendous things from this. Now, I don't know whether he's born that way. Some people are born that way, some people work it out. But there's no greater thing than to be giving. It's, as I said, it may not be as they say by Chassidim, they say that when you say l'chaim, for the moment, when you drink a little l'chaim, it doesn't feel so good right now, but it feels better later. When you do things that are selfish, at the moment it feels good, but later it doesn't feel so good. So you have two different type of things that we do in our lives. Things that immediate instant gratification, it feels so good, but it usually doesn't last. Or the other way around. So the third resolution I would humbly suggest, is some type of commitment to giving in any fashion that's compatible to you. It can be financial, it can be through time, through energy, but a true effort to turn the arrow around in life. Unfortunately, I counsel many people. That's not the unfortunate part. That's not what I meant. But unfortunately, one of the biggest problems I find when I'm speaking to people is to get them that the greatest thing that they could do for themselves, not for others, is to become a little more giving. They become so addicted and so habituated to the attitude of what can I take, that this is the most undermining force in their lives. And I can't tell you how difficult it is to convince somebody and to change that course. So it's not an easy thing to do. But if you want to truly be brutally honest with yourself, you have to look at yourself. And maybe ask a good friend to kick you in your pants and say, tell me something, am I a giving person or not? That's already halfway to redemption. If you could ask that question and be ready to get an answer that you may not like, you'll go on there. So maybe the resolution is to be able to ask the question. Yediyas hamachla is chetzi refuah. Knowledge, the awareness of an illness is half the cure. Now, I have no doubt that every human being on this earth has the ability to give and has it in them. I think what's happened is that when we grow up in homes that have cultivated insecurity and we become insecure people in an insecure world, we have superimposed upon ourselves the thing that the only way to be secure is to take. Because no one else is going to give you, you have to take. You have to protect yourself. So I feel is the heart of the real issue. That's why it's also so self-destructive. And it's not that people don't have the capacity, it's that we have undermined that capacity. Look at little children. So even though studies have been made that children can be sometimes very selfish, but overall, children do not know what it means really to be conscious takers. Unconsciously, yes, of course, a newborn child is trained to cry for milk and cry for food, or when it's in pain. That's the way God made it, because at that point the child is completely dependent on others. But once children are able to function before that stage where they become full-fledged adults and emancipated adults, as we think we may be. They are natural givers. They're natural sharers. It's not a big thing for them. You know, for example, you see children who, in a moment, they get into a fight, and they say to each other, I'm never going to talk to you the rest of my life. And within 30 seconds, they don't even remember what they said. Adults, you find, go to certain old age homes, you'll find people who don't talk to each other. And when you ask one person, how long have you not been talking to this guy? 30 years. And before that, we were best friends. So, you know, how long are you going to live? Might as well right now make up. At least you're here in the same home. You know where to go. She says, no, because if I speak to him, he's going to think he was right. You know, this thing does not exist by children. They don't have that type of, they have resilience. There's no such thing. If they get locked into, I think he's going to think he was right. You know, and then, so on the third level, I think it's an exercise. I don't think it's that easy. Now, this by no means limits resolutions. You could always take new ones and other ones. But I will say this, that we create our realities. No one can predict what's going to happen in 2009. You know, we know certain things are in motion that are not such a great forecast for economy or for other things. But one thing we know for sure, you can control what your 2009 will look like, and it's all about your attitude and who you hang around with, and what kind of vibes are in that environment. And as I always say, you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. You know, I have been blessed, thank God, maybe the environment I grew up in or the people I was around, to be part of those that try to make change and not to be the ones that are victims to other people's problems. And I welcome you to join me in that way. Being that it's also happens to be my birthday tonight, I would like to say, and they do say on a birthday, Mazol Gover, even though Mazel doesn't control us, but the energies are on my side this evening, so you'll have to, including you, Heshi, have to respect me a little more than usual. But I will say a blessing to all of you. As I said, it may not be the New Year, the Jewish New Year, like Rosh Hashanah, so we don't say L'Shana Teva Tikaseva tonight. But I will say, being that it's a new year, at least a fiscal year, and 2009, and when the ball drops, I guess something in the cosmic spiritual levels happens. Not necessarily. But what's the countdown? What time is it?
10. I forgot it was you.
Listen, you guys can still, you have 2 hours to get to the Times Square if you have you're ready to brave the weather. We can take the warmth from this room and just bring it right over there. I've never been there, so I'm not really that intrigued. I guess no one, I don't think any native New Yorkers go there altogether. It's like in Jerusalem, most people who live in Jerusalem never went to the wall.
Oh my God.
So, but I will say the following, as a small blessing, I would like to say to everybody here that despite some of the challenges that exist, that you should have the strength and the willpower to connect with others, and we should have a very healthy year, materially and spiritually, and peace of mind. And above all, I want to say a prayer and blessing for our brethren in Israel. You know, a cup kem nicht arufstellen, so I don't know if you can give a blessing to the leadership there. But you could definitely have a blessing to hundreds of thousands of young 18, 19, 20-year-old soldiers who are dedicated, standing on the front to protect Jewish lives. That's a big thing. It's a big responsibility. And that God should bless them and everyone there with the fortitude to do what has to be done, and not let this be a slow bleeding thing. Finish what you have to do and then move on. And hopefully, I think the world will respect that type of certainty. And I'm not going to go into the negative part, I already did that earlier. But God should bless Israel, and everywhere there should be peace this year. And above all, we always conclude a blessing that we finally, just as our forefathers soared through much more difficult times, the Middle Ages, and so on, that we should realize that we have the baton to carry as we continue this marathon. And I have no doubt that just as Joseph and his brothers, no matter what they went through, they finally reconciled. And they did build a powerful nation. We are the children of that nation. That we have the power to continue this, but it's up to us to want to join that and mobilize ourselves in that front. And in that sense, we're all part of one war. Some people fight it physically in Israel or other places. and some of us have to fight it spiritually. So we're not just here in America giving money to Israel or supporting the troops, etc., but we also have a war to fight here, and that's a war against apathy and against complacency, and it's a spiritual battle to stand up for what is right and what is ethical, and also to be wise, because we live in, I think, in an environment, in a community where many people are very uninformed and they don't understand the situation in Israel. A lot of propaganda, a lot of distortions, and not seeing things very clearly. Some things are quite clear if you think of it in terms of black and white, life and death, foe and friend, who wants to kill whom, who declares war and who doesn't. So it should be a year of peace and wisdom, and all of you that need to be blessed with finding a soulmate, I have to always mention that, peace in your own little environment, your home, and we should have a year of love and a year of marriage. As I always tell the singles that I know, I am ready to. I have a set of dancing shoes waiting to dance at your weddings. So please let me know and invite me. And it should be a year of simchas for everyone, and blessings, as I said, materially and spiritually. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
You're all invited to go next door.
We're going to have, in honor of the new year and in honor of a few other things, we're inviting you next door. Right here we have a little music and singing, a few stories. So we'll continue this, the less formal part in there. Those that are welcome. There's also some hot tea and other things that you can feel free to partake in. Thank you very much.